In that 60 Minutes interview, Steve Bannon also had a warning for Republican lawmakers who cross the president.
People that are not supporting the president's agenda, that are coming up for election in 18, they ought to understand they're going to get primaried. There's not going to be an opportunity to be a never Trumper. Okay? You're either going to get with the program and with the president's program and have his back, or you're going to be held accountable.
And maybe have a primary challenger.
Absolutely, 100%.
Bannon has vowed to take down 3 Republican senators in upcoming re-election fights: Arizona's Jeff Flake, Nevada's Dean Heller, and Alabama's Luther Strange. His website, Breitbart News, is also targeting Tennessee Senator Bob Corker. Corker says he's not sure if he'll run again in 2018. Now, 4 House Republicans have already said they won't seek re-election next year. Michigan's Dave Trott, Pennsylvania's Charlie Dent, Washington's Dave Reichert, and Florida's Ileana Ross-Layton. So let's go ahead and bring in Sabrina Siddiqui in Washington. She's a CBSN political contributor and political reporter for The Guardian. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, question for you. Many of these Republicans already planned to step down after 2018, but now you have these threats from Steve Bannon speaking for a certain wing of the party. If you are Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan, what's your level of concern here?
Well, I think the unpredictability of the president remains the prevailing concern. We've seen him go after people like Jeff Flake, the Arizona senator, who is facing one of the toughest re-election battles next year. Jeff Flake, of course, had written a book where he was highly critical of Trump presenting the president as a threat to conservatism. So they have a personal history there as well. And Trump has attacked him as being weak on borders, which, with immigration remaining a very toxic issue, is not what you need to be at the receiving end of if you are a vulnerable Republican incumbent. Even Senator Dean Heller, during the health care fight, when he had come out against the initial Republican bill, that was something that the president did not forget. He had also initially targeted him. So the biggest concern if you're Republican leadership is how far will President Trump take his potential opposition to some of the incumbents? Will he actually help fund their primary challengers, which he has threatened to do? And will he actively campaign against some members of his own party, which would be simply unprecedented?
How far will he go is a very good question. Sabrina, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told the New York Times that Democrats spiked the ball in the end zone a little too early in their debt limit deal with the president because Congress won't, in fact, have to address the debt ceiling until 2018. So do we still expect a showdown in December?
Well, I think that certainly Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is doing a little bit of damage control here. Of course, Republicans have been seen as the losers in that deal that was struck between the president and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. President Trump openly basked in the positive press that he had received by working hand in hand with Democrats. Now, I do think that the Treasury Department has some leeway. They can use extraordinary measures to extend the deadline to raise the debt ceiling. But the fact of the matter is that Democrats still do have some leverage to bring up certain issues. You have to also remember they have to pass a government spending bill to prevent a shutdown in mid-December as well. And so Democrats could absolutely use, for example, the status of Dreamers, those DACA recipients who are now in limbo, as leverage. They could also push for a bill to stabilize the health insurance markets because Republicans have yet to repeal and replace Obamacare. So this fight is very much not over. And even if Republicans do kick it into midterms, it's ultimately a tough vote for Republicans in Congress to raise the debt ceiling, even if it comes in the midst of midterms, arguably more so given how conservatives, especially within the base, view any vote in favor of raising the debt ceiling.
There is most certainly some leverage there. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said Tuesday that President Trump's desired 15% corporate tax rate is probably not attainable. How significant a setback is that?
It's certainly significant in that it's an acknowledgement from the White House that one of the proposals that they have outlined as part of the broader discussion for tax reform is unlikely to be achievable. They had called for reducing the corporate tax rate, which currently stands at 35%, down to 15%, which is further than most Republicans in Congress want to go. Republicans are, of course, eyeing a reconciliation, a process through which they would only need a simple majority vote to enact tax reform. But House Speaker Paul Ryan has proposed closer to to a 22.5% corporate tax rate. So I think the White House signaling that there's room for negotiation is a signal that they are willing to work more closely with Republican leaders on more obtainable goals. The question is, do they really have a clear and detailed plan for tax reform? Neither the president nor Republicans in White House have yet to detail what that process might look like, as well as what specifically they are seeking to do in terms of overhauling the nation's tax code.
I think we're all waiting on a clear plan. President Trump is hosting this bipartisan Senate dinner at the White House with 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats from red states. What role do we expect for this dinner to play?
It's interesting that red state Democrats are present for this dinner because they're some of the most vulnerable in terms of how they play out their role under the Trump administration during the Trump presidency, I should say. Joe Manchin and Heidi Heitkamp have already openly signaled that they're willing to work more closely with the president. Heidi Heitkamp was at one of the tax reform events that the president did last week in North Dakota. Joe Manchin at one point was up for potentially a cabinet position, and they're facing very tough re-election battles in states that were overwhelmingly won by President Trump. So they have to be at least willing to work with him on certain issues, or at least signal to the public that and their constituents that that's what they're willing to do. But I did speak with Senator Manchin earlier today on Capitol Hill about the prospects of tax reform, which he wants to work with the president on. And he said he's opposed to reconciliation. So these red state Democrats, if Republicans fall short of the simple majority votes that they need to enact tax reform, I think that these red state Democrats are also at the same time making clear that they think that there should be a bipartisan effort, as opposed to what you saw with health care, where Republicans very much were looking at trying to repeal and replace Obamacare, or at least reform the health care law without the support of any Democrats. All
right, a final topic and final question for you. Republican leaders have been reluctant to include Democrats in the tax reform discussion so far, but we see the president hosting some Democrats at the White House. Are Republican leaders on the same page as the White House in terms of the approach?
I think that's an interesting question that, Republicans, of course, have been very deferential to what the president has chosen to do. He's certainly unusual, and they say that, he operates outside of the norms. That's part of the reason he was successful, that he doesn't really have an allegiance to any one particular party. At the same time, if you're Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and you're looking at, your precarious hold over the Senate with just 52 seats and some of these vulnerable Democrats that you have a pretty good chance of taking down, it's not helpful that they're able to show a more bipartisan presence in Washington by pointing to their meeting with the president. I don't think it helps when President Trump is standing on stage with someone like Heidi Heitkamp either. I know that he has also praised some of the other Democrats who are facing tough re-elections. So I think that it's not the optics that Republicans want to see. The question again becomes back to our earlier discussion as to what President Trump's demeanor will look like during the midterm elections. Is he actually going to buck the norms and potentially criticize some of the Republican incumbents and in some ways help Democratic incumbents, or will you see a more typical script where he actively campaigns against some of these Democrats with whom he is currently at least willing to sit down?
All right, it's always good to get your take. Sabrina Siddiqui, thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you.